The best practice is, first of all, don't assume that everyone hates you, everyone knows about it. Don't assume that. Secondly, actually, that doesn't matter. What matters is your mindset moving forward. And your mindset moving forward is have to accept this situation right now, no matter how unfair it seems or what have you. You have to accept this is where you're at right now. The chances are that in default setting, you're trying to not accept it and put that responsibility on others. But regardless of what other people do, you are in the situation. So what are you going to do now? And ask yourself this question: how do I make the best of this? How could this turn out to be one of the most important, amazing moments of my life?
Hey, welcome to Unlatched Minds. This is episode 52. My guest today is Dr. Howard Rankin. Howard had written a book titled "Falling to Grace: The Art and Science of Redemption," where he really walks us through, one of the biggest mistakes he's made in his life, which was really, he was a well-respected psychologist, had a sexual encounter with one of his clients, and then, the book really tells the story of his journey from sort of the fall and, through his quote unquote redemption, if you will. Really interesting story. There's just a ton of I would say lessons learned that Howard's sharing throughout this conversation, throughout the book, of course. We also touch on, sort of his issues with how, the medical board in his case, and I think he's making the case for the medical boards in general, how they handle things like this, and how perhaps due process isn't followed, and how, and overall how accusations like this aren't really responded to as they should be in the most just way possible. But that really is not the point of this discussion. That was kind of a backdrop. Really, I think the conversation we had was really about, admittedly, he made a massive mistake in his life. It affected his marriage, his community, his finances, his psychology license was stripped up from him. And he really talks about his journey to getting back on his feet with his wife, with his family, with his church, with his community. So a lot of lessons learned in this story. I really hope you get a lot out of it. I certainly did. So anyway, with that, let's jump in. Dr. Howard Rankin. Well, Dr. Howard Rankin, I do appreciate your time. I really do. I know you got a lot going on as to why. So this is greatly appreciate your time, though. I really do. Like I was just saying before we hit record, I looked through a lot of your material, and your personal story is kind of something I was trying to find other like topics to talk about, but your personal story is too awesome. It really is, and I used that word "awesome" loosely. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's a journey, and I think there's a lot of folks who get there's a lot of lessons learned there, and especially your perspective on it and your reflection on what you went through. I think there's just too much good nuggets in there not to share it. So you're gracious enough to share it with us. So I'm happy to walk through that. So anyway, before we get started, maybe a little background on yourself.
Okay. I was born and raised in London. Did my education in Britain. I was actually an exchange student in Southern California in high school, which was a lot of fun. Um, did my bachelor's, and then went on did a master's and PhD in clinical psychology. Spent the first about 10 years of my career working in an academic setting, doing research on addictions and doing some clinical work. Moved for about 4 years to a private hospital, and then was recruited by a friend to come over and run what was then called the Hilton Head Health Institute, which is a sort of residential wellness weight program. And again, did that for 10 years, brought me over to the US. And then I branched out, did a lot of speaking, consulting, opened a private practice. Um, and yeah, until that fateful moment almost 10 years ago.
So that was 10 years ago. I was going to ask the timeline. Okay,
Yeah,
so about 10
yeah,
years ago. Okay.
yeah.
So well, what happened?
Okay,
Let's
yes.
jump right into it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to go on too long at any one point in time. So I had been working with a very as soon as I start telling this, your listeners will know what I'm talking about. But
Hmm.
I did take on a female client, very seductive, very borderline personality, very manipulative. But I resisted all of that while we were working together. We worked together for 3 years. I think it was helpful, and then it was time to stop. And that was fine. And then she called me up a few months later and said, "Oh, I'd like to come back and see you." And I said, "Well, not as a therapist, not, yeah, come and drop in. I know you work nearby. Drop in lunchtime and tell me how you're doing." And we did this on and off for about 4 years. And then one time in August 2012, when she was leaving the office, she kissed me, and what I've been trying to do for the last 7 years, which was resist her approaches, failed, and we went into a very brief couple of days, very consensual sexual relationship. And then I think we both agreed. I thought we both agreed that okay, we shouldn't be doing this. That's crazy. So we stopped. And then about a month later, I got a call from the licensing board to say that someone had filed a complaint against me for sexual misconduct.
Hmm.
Well, I knew who had filed the complaint because that was the only person who ever had a sexual relationship with a client. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, a few months later, the board revoked my license to practice psychology permanently. And more importantly, perhaps, or as important, it was in the local and state newspaper.
Hmm.
And so, here I am. I'd lived on Hilton Head for 27 years at that point and done a lot and was a popular psychologist, good reputation. And now all that's thrown down the drain.
What was it? Maybe I missed it, but was there no legal case brought against you?
Okay, well, that raises the subtext or the backstory of the book that I subsequently wrote about it.
Hmm.
And this is a big issue for me, not personally for me, but generally for healthcare workers. The way the licensing boards operate is, I believe, totally unethical, which is ironic given that they are meant to be ethical. Typically, what happens if a complaint is made against you, you do have the opportunity to hire an attorney and what have you. But the whole mindset of the board, and apparently a lot of attorneys who work with this, is just plead mercy for the board to the board. Say, yeah, I made a mistake, but blah, blah, blah. I won't do it again. Just plead mercy and they'll be fine. What that means is you don't get a chance to hear or see any testimony from the people making the charges or any other witnesses or who those witnesses were. And I subsequently obviously challenged what my lawyer had done, but found out that this is kind of the typical thing you do. Oh, they're a board of peers. They understand, plead mercy. When you plead mercy, basically you give up all your rights. I've just written a sort of press release about that. The Sixth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution lays down the rules for people who are charged in criminal cases. But presumably it was meant to be, for anyone charged with anything, this is how you operate. One, they have to have access to any witness and all their testimony, and they can provide witnesses. That did not happen in my case. And subsequently, when I filed a Freedom of Information Act, they refused to provide any information. Now, I've moved on, and we'll talk about that in the 10 years since. But for the thousands and thousands of healthcare workers, including doctors and nurses and you name it in that field, they should not be subject to this sort of treatment. It's outrageous. And if anything, I want to shine the light on that, use my case to shine the light on that and say this has to change. One of the things in this press release that just composed, you know, one of the things that they say, the board said, this isn't anything personal. This is just to protect the public. Honestly, that's BS. They're taking your license and your livelihood and you're being shamed and it's not personal. I mean, that's a bit like saying, well, we went after Hitler. No, it wasn't anything personal, but it was for the public good. I mean, that's nonsense, right? We also know about cognitive bias, a topic that I got really interested in. And there's some interesting research that shows that people who are judging things, quotation mark, for the public good are more likely to be biased than other situations. So there is no such thing as objectivity. I recognize that. But this way in which boards operate, which is you're presumed guilty and just plead mercy and not actually go through the effort of finding out who said what, is wrong, plain wrong.
Yeah, so this is already hurting my head here, and I guess I'm not surprised because I just feel like, I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot of ass covering in those boards, and hey, just make ourselves look good, and the easiest way to do it is to you got an accusation, let's get him out of here, and he's the scapegoat, and then we look fine.
Yep.
Right. So I guess I'm not blown away by what happened to you, unfortunately. And again, I'm not getting into whether or not what actually happened and
right.
your guilt and all that. But
absolutely,
the idea, the process is what we're talking about, and the fact that for the public good. Well, if they were standing up for the public good, isn't the precursor to that whether or not you actually did something that jeopardizes the public good? So anyone can make an accusation against you, whether or not it's true or not. It has to be discovered, and then they should respond. Because if in this case it wasn't, I don't know. Again, in some regular case, anyone can make an accusation. It could be completely made up, and then for the quote unquote public good, that you or the other person is let go. In reality, it was just. The whole assumption of innocence is the whole system that we're supposed to be based on, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they circumvent the actual law in a sense.
Yeah, and they make it really difficult to pursue it. I have no idea what this woman said, but I suspect it was something nasty that I did not do. She might have claimed sexual assault or that I raped her or something. I have no idea. And that's the problem. I'm not saying, and we'll get into this, that I didn't do anything inappropriate. I did, no question about it. And I don't know what happened, so that makes it really difficult for me to judge the judgment. Right?
But you did something inappropriate, you would say, to define that term. You're defining inappropriate with, you were a married man at the time?
Yes, exactly.
So inappropriate in your life and your commitment to your wife, but not inappropriate in the eyes of the law, per se.
Correct.
Like you didn't, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Big difference there, right? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
So, excuse me. So if nothing else, I really want to raise this whole board issue. And if you talk to people in the health profession, in the medical profession, as soon as you mention boards, they'll roll their eyes because they know how much havoc they can wreak, really. Interestingly enough, just yesterday I visited my cardiologist, and I gave her a copy of the book. And she started to tell me all the things that had happened to her, people that, for whatever reason, she rubbed the wrong way or what have you. They all started making complaints against her, and she spent months and a lot of money defending herself and justifying herself. But,
and those boards have you. They have they have you, right? I mean, they can revoke your license, which literally
they can revoke your
evaporates
license,
your livelihood. Yeah.
Yep. And of course, once that gets out in the news, which it does, then you're into the shame, guilt, humiliation. How am I ever going to get a job? No one's going to employ me, sort of situation. And it's devastating, potentially devastating.
Yeah, and I want to get to that redemption side because that's a big part of your story here, which I think is incredible. But even before that, though, I mean, were you able to take like civil action against the board? Is that is that like, hey, defamation of character, or is there? I don't know the law. I'm making up these terms, but is there anything? Like that?
Looking back now and knowing what I know now, maybe
Hmm.
I could have done that. I think it probably would have been difficult. Um,
Expensive.
but, well, yeah, certainly very expensive.
Yeah.
Um, at a time when you've just lost your job and your livelihood, uh, you know, shelling out, thousands and thousands of dollars for a questionable legal case.
Hmm.
I originally thought of filing an appeal, but the appeal process really wasn't terribly encouraging. You couldn't introduce new evidence. And, I did hire a lawyer briefly, and after talking with him, I decided it was a waste of time.
Hmm.
And also, part of that was I got to move on with my life. If I stay stuck fighting this case, I cannot move on with my life.
Yeah.
And, and that's, I'll need to be in a better position to do that. And that's why this book comes out,
Hmm.
9 years after this happened, because it given me a chance to regroup, recreate myself, and so forth. So now I'm in a position, a totally different position than I was when
Hmm.
that happened.
Hmm.
Um,
So okay. And when did the book come out?
the book came out in April of this year.
Of this year,
So
okay. And
yeah,
is it telling the story of these past 10
yeah.
years?
So the book, Falling to Grace: The Art and Science of Redemption, um, primarily is about trying to help people who find themselves in these sorts of situations where they've been outed, humiliated, shamed. It's on the internet. It's all over the place. What do you do with that? That's the prime purpose of the book, is to
Hmm.
help people there. The backstory of dealing with the licensing board is sort of the backstory, but secondary issue, but it's still an important one. And I want to use it, if at all possible, to start a serious discussion about how boards operate.
Hmm. Now,
This notion that it's, oh, a board of your peers. Well, that that sounds like, oh, well, that's great because they will know your business. But wait a minute, they may be in competition with you. They may
hmm.
have heard gossip from you. They're not objective. As I said in this release, if Anderson Cooper was pulled up before a committee and, Fox presenters, Tucker Carlson was on the committee, do you think that would be fair? Or vice versa?
Right, right.
Probably not. But they're a jury of his peers, right? So, I
Hmm.
mean, that how it should operate, honestly, is in serious cases where there is a potential loss of license, there should be a hearing held by a judge. The
Hmm.
board make their case, and the defendant makes his case before a judge. When you have an organization, a body that is judge, jury, prosecutor, forget it. You got no chance. It's a setup.
It's literally the reason we have our justice system in the country, where
Yeah, exactly.
there's a jury selection process, which
Right.
in your case there is no selection. It's just that's the body that was there, and those are quote unquote your peers. So it seems like everything that we have in our system, our legal system in this country, is not in place in these when it's you versus the board of directors. So that
Right, right.
make
Yeah,
yeah.
and the ethics board at that time, I think there were 5 women, and 6 women, and 2 guys. Um,
Right.
do you think men and women see a situation like this the same? No,
Impossible.
I'm not.
Impossible.
It's
Right.
impossible.
Yeah.
So,
Although nowadays, well, I won't get into that, but no, the answer is no. They will not, just based on actual facts and reality. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. Now,
yeah.
the
So,
journey of the book. So again, I don't. I'll paraphrase what I just gleaned from the synopsis of
hmm
the book. You were in the darkest place ever, and
yep,
then your rise to redemption. I mean, you say falling to grace, which I think it's an interesting phrase. Falling to
hmm
grace, which is neat.
hmm
Yeah, summarize I mean, it must have been an incredible 10 years,
yeah,
ups, highs, lows, enlightenment, and
sure,
interesting you were, and I'll let you just kind of respond in a second, but like you were Jewish and you converted to Catholicism. That's an
correct, yeah,
interesting,
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So faith was a big part of your journey.
Yes, a part of it, certainly, for sure. Yes.
Mm.
Um, I was raised in a Jewish family and went through all the rituals. It's fine, and I certainly have a strong connection with Jewish heritage. But spiritually, it didn't quite reach me, and that may have been because I was born into it, and
Mm.
and it was just something that you accepted, and that was fine. Actually, interestingly enough, when I went to university, I got more and more interested in Buddhism.
Mm.
Um, uh, for not just its ethic, but what it said about consciousness, which I thought was absolutely right. And you certainly can see Buddhism as a non-theistic discipline. It doesn't have to be related in any way to a
Mm.
particular religion and spirit. So I was really into that. I married my wife, um, and she was a Catholic. And because I wasn't committed um, to Judaism, I said, that's fine. I'll go to church with you. That's fine. If when we raise kids, we'll raise them Catholic. I don't really have a problem with that, but I'm not going to convert. And so I
Mm.
got involved in the church and all of this. When this came up, obviously one of the most important one, uh, challenge was, how is my wife going to deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm telling her not just that I cheat on her, but I've lost my job, my income. It's pretty devastating.
Mm.
And understandably, she was angry at first, but eventually was able to, in a relatively short space of time, forgive me. And we were able to move on together, probably stronger in our relationship than ever.
Hmm.
And I really believed that was her ability to do that was a function of her faith. And that really impressed me. And down at this deep bottom, I thought, you know what? If I'm going to have a relationship with God, it really needs to be on his terms, not mine.
Mm.
And so I decided to convert to Catholicism, which was a great spiritual step and a big help for me. When people say, oh, what religion you are, I say, well, I'm sort of Catholic, Jewish, Buddhist. There's a lot of overlap between those faiths or disciplines, however you want to look
Some
at it.
major differences as well.
Yeah,
So,
some major
some would argue
differences.
the critical one. There's a critical difference there that yeah, but
Yeah, oh yeah, we
there's
definitely get into that.
who is Jesus
But
Christ versus he's a
yeah,
guy,
yeah,
some dude versus the Savior. It's a big difference,
yeah,
but
yeah,
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 but
yeah.
you
No,
you found
absolutely.
strength from all three. It sounds like.
Yeah, I think so.
Mm.
And joining the Catholic Church was important to me,
Mm.
and that was demonstrated not long after that actually happened before the board judgment. 2 or 3 weeks before the board judgment. Then the board judgment came out. Then it was in the newspaper on a Friday.
Mm.
So the first social outing I had to do when this had been front page news was to go to church.
Mm.
And I was so apprehensive about how people would view me. They would judge me, they'd walk the other way, they would whatever. And actually, that's not what happened. The reverse happened.
Mm.
People came up to me, said, I know who you are, I support you, keep your head up, and it was amazing. It was mind-blowing, actually. And here I was thinking, well, I've been in this chokehold of despair and depression, and being able to smile wasn't even on my radar. But
Mm.
this love and support that I got from the people that was mind-blowing. And that's what you need, because when you are in a situation like this, you do feel and you do think, probably unreasonably, that A, everyone knows and they don't. B, everyone now hates you and they don't. Right? And so to get confirmation of people saying, look, I know who you are, I still care about you, I'm supportive of you, is massive,
Yeah.
because you have dug this hole for yourself and you think, that's it, nobody's ever going to relate to me. And having people relate to you positively is amazing. That's what you need, in the right
Yeah.
way too. Now, you don't need, look, what I'm not saying, first of all, I cheated on my wife. Certainly what I did was inappropriate, for sure. Did the board make the right decision? Honestly, I don't know, but because I don't have any evidence of what people said. So this isn't about me, I'm a poor victim. No, not at all. The first thing you have to do in a situation is accept it and accept your responsibility for it. And if you don't do that, you're stuck. You're stuck. And I know people in various other sort of similar situations who have spent years and thousands of dollars in their whole life trying to reverse what they saw was wrong. There's time for that. You got to get on with your life. And the key there for me was I saw a quote from Viktor Frankl, which was about meaning and purpose, and how your perception is the one thing that people cannot take away from you. I read that and I thought, okay, the question now is not what happened, is this fair, what have you. The question now is, what do I make of this? How do I make the best of this situation? If in 5 years' time this is the greatest thing that ever happened to me, what would I need to do?
Right.
And that's, I think the default setting for so many of us is denial. Every felon I ever talked to in clinical practice took that, oh, it was the judge's, my lawyer's fault, or my judge's fault, or the guy, that I robbed the bank with, it was his fault. Yeah, dude, but you walked into a bank with a gun,
Yeah.
But, the default setting is not my fault. Yes, it is your fault. You have some responsibility. It doesn't mean everyone else is blameless and guilt-free. Unfairness is everywhere, but you cannot allow that to distract from your own acceptance and responsibility.
Yeah. And I mean, that reflects very well on the Catholic Church and the folks that were there. I mean, that is right. I mean, that's really a main mantra in there. I'm not going to judge you, right? I mean, we all say that. It's hard to do sometimes, but it sounds like they responded exactly as a quote unquote Christian should. It's like, hey,
yes, they did.
That's between you and God. You're on the upswing. I'm going to pray for you. All the things that you would think on paper would be exactly other good quote unquote Catholics should respond. So, and that must have brought, I mean, you entering the church there must have brought you and your wife closer. I would imagine you're sharing her faith now more, explicitly. So,
yeah. And our son, we raised him as Catholic. So, he was.
You raised, say again?
And our son, who was raised.
Oh, I thought you said we raised 10. I'm like, 10?
No.
Your son, got it.
And, one of the moments that I recount in the book that was, again, also so critical is my wife and I found out that this was going to be in the local newspaper. And my son at that time had graduated, just about graduated from college, or had graduated from college, was joining the Army, and had just gone down to Fort Benning in Georgia for his training. And we knew this was going to come out in the local paper, and we knew we had to be the first to tell him, not have him find out somebody on Facebook telling him, oh, did you see? So we told him, we're sitting around, we did a Zoom with him, my wife and I told him, and he said, Mom, I'm so proud of you. Thank you. Dad, I know who you are. It doesn't matter.
Mm.
Uh, and, which was amazing. And then he said, do you guys need any money? And, I mean, we just
Well, you
broke
raised one
down
heck
in
of a boy
tears.
there. I mean, you raised one heck of a. I mean,
He's an amazing young man. He
yeah.
really is. And so again, moments like that are just joyous. And, you know, uh, times of trouble are tough, but if they produce diamonds like that, you
Mm.
say, okay, I had to go through it to it. So it was moments like that that help. And certainly, I don't want to necessarily compare myself with everyone who's in this sort of situation. This happened to me later in life where, to some extent, I was a bit more mature and probably understood more quickly what I needed to do.
Mm.
So I think there were factors that made it easier for me than it would be others, for sure. I was in an accepting marriage and a good marriage, and I had a great son. And so a lot of those extraneous factors were definitely positive, whereas for some people who didn't have them, then I certainly can imagine you're left on your own and you're in the dark. And as it was, I had some very dark moments.
Mm. I mean, if someone's listening now, I mean, and perhaps there's wives right now listening, and there's maybe this just happened to them. What would be your recommendation? I mean, obviously, it sounds like your wife responded as idealistically as, and I'm sure you had a lot of ups and downs during that. I don't want to
Yeah.
cast it. Hey, it was just perfect. She said, "All right, no problem. We'll work on it."
No,
I'm
no,
sure
no,
there
no,
was
no, no.
some
Oh, yes,
crazy
of course.
discussions.
Yeah.
I don't see any scars
Yeah.
on you, so I don't think she threw a lamp at you. But,
Um,
but what would you say to them? I mean, best practices if they find themselves in a
the best
situation.
practice is, first of all, don't assume that everyone hates you, everyone knows about it. Don't assume that.
Hmm.
Secondly, actually, that doesn't matter. What matters is your mindset moving forward. And your mindset moving forward is have to accept this situation right now, no matter how unfair it seems or what have you. You have to accept this is where you're at right now. Maybe down the road you can, get some fairness or what have you. The chances are that in default setting, you're trying to not accept it and put that responsibility on others. But regardless of what other people do, you are in the situation. So what are you going to do now? And ask yourself this question. How do I make the best of this? How could this turn out to be one of the most important, amazing moments of my life?
Hmm.
Because the reality is, life's unfair, life's tough. It's about adaptation. And if you want to be a true hero, and you can be, this has given you the opportunity to be a true hero. You accept where you are now and you move forward positively, one step at a time,
Hmm.
accepting here it is, and move towards your goals, move towards who you want to be. Allow this to turn you into the person you want to be.
Hmm. Right. Now, it sounds like your perspective you were just articulating was from your perspective in your case. Now, what if you
Yes.
want to recommend someone who's in your wife's perspective? What do you think the best practices for them to respond would be?
The key obviously is honesty and authentic communication
Hmm.
between both parties. That is the key. Honesty is so important. I have to tell you, Minnie, one of the things that I learned as I went through this, and part of it was my acceptance of the situation. When I ran across people, in what I subsequently did as a ghostwriter and doing various other things, initially that was like almost the first thing I told people,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and the amazing reaction that I got wasn't, "Oh, you idiot! Why would you do that?" And I don't want anything to do with you. By far, the most uh, common reaction was, "Thank you so much for being honest with me. I really appreciate that."
Hmm.
And having people say that to you and respond warmly to you is huge at that stage. It's huge. And it's true. People do not expect others to air their dirty laundry. On the contrary, they expect them to defend them.
Mm.
You don't need to defend them. Just be honest. That's your best defense. That's the right defense. Hey, I'm honest. If you are trying to blame everybody else and what have you, and not accept that responsibility, that's how you'll come across as somebody who just doesn't want to face up.
Yeah, and it's that
Whether that's
victim
fair or not.
mentality where it's just
Yeah.
it's like all your felon examples
Right.
pointing it's this person. It becomes a I don't know. I feel like we need to start marching more towards the trend of being vulnerable and not putting on this fake shell like we have it all buttoned up, because none of us do. And with
Yep.
Facebook, and I call it the highlight reel, you're scrolling through Facebook and Instagram,
Right.
and everyone's posting all the beautiful things that are happening to them. And then as soon as they hang up the phone, reality sets in, and their kid, and it could some of their lives are disasters. And I think, I don't know. I wish the more we can get past that to the point where just like, yeah, I suck here. I'm flawed. I'm flawed. I'm not good at this. My wife and I are having some horrible discussions. We're not the kid, and just be real. I think that brings people together. And I think your example of, because no one, and I feel like that's a good, I feel like with the migration away from like, buttoned up TV shows and more of this like podcasting, people are being more real and just talking. And there's no network saying, hey, you can't say that. No one's going to want to hear that. It's like, people just be vulnerable, and you see, wow, we're all full of warts and scars, and I just think that's missing. We all put on these fake shells. It's like, good morning, how are you? Great, you? And then we just go back to our normal. It's like, no one's all great. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's shitty. Let's just talk about it together. So, but it sounds like your example of, bringing that up when you first interface with someone, it's like an example of that, where I feel like it's bringing you and whoever is closer, right out of the gate.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have to, if we're going to be honest and authentic and be our real selves, we have to be vulnerable, because we're all vulnerable. And, we do live in a culture which is trying to make everyone like Superman. And if you're not Superman or want to be Superman, there's something wrong with you. That is inappropriate. And it is a problem. And it's certainly a problem for kids growing up who have grown up in that environment via social media. I do work now with a nonprofit called Sapien Labs, great organization that do research on mental health around the world. And in their recent 2021 report, they show, and they tested like 225,000 people, and they had an 18 to 24-year-old group that, consisted of thousands of people around the internet-enabled countries. What they found was staggering, that 44%, almost half of 18 to 24-year-olds said they were distressed or very stressed over things that we call related to social self. That is their social perception, where they think they stand in relation to others, this sort of celebrity comparison anxiety, or comparison anxiety generally with other people, putting stuff. It's sad. And it's sad because there's this fake, I'm okay, on a fake virtual platform. Right? A virtual interaction or SMS interaction is not a real interaction. Right? 100%. I mean, if you're interacting with somebody on Facebook, and they say something they don't like, they can be threatening, they can be nasty, right. They wouldn't, probably most people would not do that in a face-to-face interaction. They might roll their eyes, or they might say, but in a way that allowed some continuation
feedback.
Of that.
Right.
Yeah, some feedback to get the game going, how we interact. And there's evidence that the parts of the brain that teach us social interaction and emotional understanding, the mirror neurons, do not work at all, or maybe very poorly, in virtual interaction. And so you got a generation who are spending 7-10 hours a day in fake interaction, which is actually taking away from real interaction, which is where they need to be to learn these skills. And so, we estimate that a typical 18-year-old today has maybe the social skills of a 10-year-old in a pre-internet world. They're just not getting the training that you get
Yeah.
from real interpersonal
Being on the
reaction.
playground and really, yeah. I mean, it's in a, you sound like the old traditionalist when you say that, right? And I mean, I'm 40, what am I, 46, 5 now? I forget. Gosh, but it's like, I'm kind of, I mean, maybe I'm caught between the tech world and the old school world, right? So I'm kind of in this hybrid, but if you just zoom out, the neurons you just referred to, I don't know much about the brain, but I know there's neurons in there, and I know they didn't take 20 years to evolve, right? They took
Right.
hundreds of thousands of years, and technology's been a thing for 20-ish, Facebook, whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just based on that, you could say, oh, humanity, are not prepared to interact this way. We don't know how to do it.
We don't.
We're short-circuiting all the wires.
Imagine this. Imagine watching a video of a plane crash, and imagine being there and watching a plane crash.
Big difference.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Oh. Yeah.
It's remote. It's distant. It's not. In some ways, it's not real. We're trying to make it real, but it isn't, and it's a major problem.
Yeah, you said something that's key. It's like, you always hear the phrase "comparison is the thief of joy." And I love that. I say it all the time because I can feel myself getting caught up in that rut sometimes, and I'm like, wait, why? If you just can not compare yourself to that other thing or person, literally half of the stuff you were just worried about goes away. So you take that and you take kids, teenagers especially, and you add the internet and social media, and it takes that comparison and just exponentially shoots us through the stratosphere. So I don't. It's this thing that scares me the most. With depression and anxiety in kids. It's just, people. You hear people. I'll shut off the screens, and I'm. I understand screens are important. I mean, I'm a software engineer. Most of my world's in front of screens. But the social side of it, I don't know. I don't know. And I bring this up on almost every podcast because I see it firsthand with my friends' kids, and I'm getting. I see my kids are 6 and 8, and those iPads are. I mean, I can hear the dopamine shooting out of their ears when it turns on, and when the battery runs out, it's like someone shot them. Like, what happened?
Right. No. And it's a big challenge. There's no question about it. And the factor is, it's only going to get worse, actually, with the metaverse and virtual reality. I mean, virtual reality is a good expression. That's exactly what a lot of people are living in, a virtual reality. It's not real. It's not real. And as you rightly say, we haven't evolved enough. We're not evolved enough to be able to learn from virtual reality everything we can learn from real life interaction. And so,
my last podcast I did last week with a gentleman, he was talking about how escapism is important, meaning, hey, I put on the VR glasses, or it's important in short bursts, but your return to reality is very important, right? And understanding that difference, and the escapism gives you a little break from things, but then coming back to reality is of critical importance. And what I'm thinking is, well, like you just said, with the metaverse and with the reality that, you could argue, hey, we're all kind of in virtual reality now with our phones, so it's tied to our hip. And then you take virtual reality glasses, and then you take what Elon Musk is trying to do in Neuralink. We're going to be tapped in to the internet more permanently in the near future. So again, I get worried because, well, to my previous guest point, which was, escapism is good, but then you have to return to reality, and that delta is what gives you that benefit, because you saw the virtual and you go back to reality and you had that escape. But if the ability kind of goes away, where there's no glasses to take off, and you just kind of click your fingers and you're in, I feel like we're going to stay in that virtual reality more than the reality, and then now maybe some point in the distant future, the virtual reality will become the more normal reality. That's probably true, long term, but this transition is going to be really weird and troublesome for a lot, especially the growing brains of kids and teenagers, right?
Right. No, exactly right. I mean, your generation, my generation, we'd gone through that process when technology arrived. So we developed those skills. So we know how to interact. But, this generation is the first to be raised with screens available from birth,
Ubiquitous, yeah. Yeah.
and born into it. And as you rightly say, those critical adolescent years when you're finding yourself. Oof.
Mm. How the heck did we get here? I forgot how we got here. To get to technology.
Yeah. I forget. I was mentioning the Sapiens.
Hey, I'm the host. That's my problem, not yours. No, but being authentically vulnerable. I mean, I think I wrote that down as you were talking. I think that was so key to you just owned what you went through. I give your wife credit. I don't know. I don't know her, but just hearing it sounded like the community around you, your wife, the church, your son, the neighbors. It seems like you had, and I don't want to use hyperbole here, but it seems like you had like the best possible community to grow from,
yes.
to grow from this.
Yeah. I really think I did. And I had lots of people supporting me as I moved forward on that journey, and that, to get out of that feeling of I'm an idiot, I'm useless, that depressed feeling, what have I done? All those negative feelings, to have people around you supporting what you're now trying to do is massive. It would be hard to imagine what somebody who had zero of that would be in. And actually, somebody who had zero of that and had no social connection at all, particularly if they were younger, I personally believe that would make them vulnerable to all sorts of extremism. And I think that's partly where we get mass shooters from, because I've done some research on that. And
isolation.
A lot of these guys, were raised in very poor environments, weren't appreciated, and had horrendous self-view. Everyone thought and said to them, "You're useless," and what have you. And they had no connection to people. If you have no connection to people, killing them doesn't seem so bad. But, would you really expect a really sociable guy who has lots of friends to do that? No, I don't think so. Right? And so we have more and more of those.
I think I'm pretty sure the last stat I read was one of the biggest indicators of longevity is your social connection. In other words, when they take who lives longest, it's tied back to how healthy their social environment was, how many true friends they had, how many people could they, do they have a person around to hug when shit goes sideways, especially guys. We have a weird, especially I'm one of those, we have a weird thing like that. Like, you should have guy friends that you can hug and cry with. Yep. And for me, it's like, I think, okay, that's going to take some time to figure that one out. But but
I'm always here.
I think all the day. You're knocking your door. You don't look out the window. No, but it's like but the date is in. I think the date is in, right? I mean, that is, massively important to us.
Oh, it's huge, because it isn't just the relationship you're having with other people. That influences massively the relationship you have with yourself.
And yourself.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it affects everything. It isn't about, I don't like going to parties. I don't care that I'm a loner. That's going to influence your self-perception, unquestionably, and therefore everything you do. So, relationships are the key. They really are. And, there's been books written by people who are looking after the dying, and what they regret. And one of them always is, I didn't invest more time in my relationships. My relationships were the most important thing, and I didn't realize it.
Yeah,
no question.
Yeah, it's so funny. We're human. We're terrible at so many things. Like, the data's in.
Yep.
I've had a million. I've had what? This is my 52nd podcast. I've said this on probably 35 of them. More relationships. No one, if you go to the nursing homes, and you take the polls, it's always the same thing. So when data is ever that consistent, it's like, that's a really good theory to follow that data. And it's,
Right.
the regrets are never, I wish I worked more. I wish I missed more of my kids' events and Christmas mornings because I was working. Like, it's none of that ever. It's always relationships. I wish I was more present with, just, I wish I chose quality time with the family over working. Like, there's 5
Yeah.
to 8 basic tenets.
Hmm.
And you would think we would all just get it, but no, we don't really get it. Maybe cerebrally a lot of us get it, but in action,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
this
I
is
think
something
it's true.
I'm
Yep.
trying to be
Well,
better with now. Yeah, man.
yep. Yeah.
And so the book itself, again, the title "Falling to Grace." What is it? "Falling to Grace," the art.
The
What's
art
the
and
title? I'm sorry.
science of redemption.
There it goes. Yeah. Now it's I looked at the highlights, and again,
Yeah.
disclosure, I haven't read it. You talk about you talk about some things that I took some notes here. What you must do to heal. I mean, we touched on some of them, but does a book go through sort of? It sounds
Yes.
like it goes through like a,
There's
pulls
sort
an
of a little
example through and what you should do.
checklist
Yeah.
examples and a workbook that goes with it. So the
Mm,
first thing is acceptance. You have to accept it, otherwise you're not dealing with a realistic situation, so you can't get anywhere. So acceptance is key. You do need to find people who are going to support you. You do need to be honest and
mm,
authentic, because when you're honest and authentic, people respond much better to you. You're showing your vulnerability, and people actually think of that as a strength
mm,
that, hey, maybe a lot of people don't have. So I think those things are important. That honesty is key. And one of the things you'll find, if you're honest, if you're not wanting to be vulnerable and you're not wanting to be authentic, when you interact with people, what you're going to do is you're going to say, oh, I hope they don't know about this. Oh, I better not give anything away. I mean, that sort of anxiety comes in. When you're
mm.
authentic and honest and say, hey, this is it, and you get that authentic feedback back, that cannot be beaten. That strategy cannot be beaten. And you will be stunned by the number of people who see that as a positive thing. What people are looking at, not just what you say, but who you are and how you're saying it.
Yeah.
And if you say that in the right way, you're going to get a certain degree, quite a lot of respect. And also, it means you've come to terms with it. And hey, in a sense, you don't really care what people respond. They may say, well, thanks, that was a stupid thing to do. And, I really don't want anything to do with you. Oh, thank you for telling me. It's great. It doesn't make a difference to me. And in the book, um, there's a great story, if I can recount it, on this journey.
Mm,
So after I've decided what am I going to do with this, I had enjoyed writing during my career. And fortunately, at the time, there were beginning of a number of sites, freelance sites, connecting people looking for ghostwriters and writers. So I started joining them. And yeah, there's an interesting story there. But one of the first guys I spoke to was a guy called Drew, a really great banker, who was like one of the youngest vice presidents of a major bank. Awesome guy. So I'd applied for his job. I hadn't heard. And then like 3 weeks later, I get a call from him. Oh, this is cool. And so we talk about it. And then I say, okay, Drew, this is great. I'd love to help you. However, I do need to tell you this one thing.
mm.
So I told him my story, and there was a silence. And then he said, they're lost, my gain. I could have reached through the phone and hugged that guy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there were technical difficulties doing that, so we just agreed to go on. Now, what's interesting, even more about that story is, it's his story in business. Amazing guy. After a couple of weeks, he told me that he actually had been diagnosed with ALS, Lou
Ooh,
Gehrig's disease,
Garrix.
but he sounded pretty good. So, but as we worked on this book, we were having weekly calls and stuff like this. He was getting weaker and weaker. In fact, one time we were Skyping from it. He was Skyping me from his hospital bed.
Ooh.
And then his wife gets on the phone or calls me and says, we need to get this done like ASAP. So scramble around for 2 or 3 weeks, make sure we get it done. Man, the book's done. Great. He gets on the Skype call and doesn't look good and says, "Thank you so much. You're on our team, amazing." But he died the next day.
Wow.
And just to be part of that, I mean, it's just like, hey, if I wouldn't have gone through this, if I wouldn't have lost my license, I'd never helped this guy. I would never have known this guy. I would never have had this experience. Oh my God. And it was so amazing. Here I was, I'm able to help some guy, leave his legacy to his kids. It was phenomenal. And so, it was, hey, just because I don't have a psychology license doesn't mean I can't do good. I can't help people. This just proves it. And that was a big moment,
Well, you said it earlier. It's really and it applies to anything in life where you can't really, you can't affect what's coming at you. Now, in your case, you did something you could control, but then the response, you can't, if you're going to be judged, you can control your perspective on it. And like, I think you said, no one can take that away from you, whoever you quoted, which I think I took that note. That's
Victor
critical.
Frankl. Yeah. The one thing people cannot take away from you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So, yeah. So,
well, what do you? His story is amazing. It really is, and I appreciate you sharing it. I always say that to folks because just having something when you go through something so personal, sharing it publicly it takes a certain amount of guts, and you also you're not taking that victim mentality. You're owning it up, so it's really hard to. Now I'm sure there's some people out there would say, "Oh, you scumbag, cheat on your wife," and they're just, that's is going to be that. I'm sure that's probably the minority, but it is what it is. So what else are you working on? What else you got going on? What's next?
Okay, so I started out looking for writing jobs where my psychology background would obviously be helpful, and I obviously have a very deep psychology and neuroscience background and what have you. And so before long, I was getting quite a lot of work and meeting some amazing, amazing people. Two of the leading neurologists in the world, just amazing. We're great friends now. They're an amazing family. I work with them in different respects. And just people like that. It was, regular people with stories to tell. It's just been fantastic. And the longer I've done that, and spent nearly a decade now doing that, obviously I've built up quite a history and experience doing it. So I am pretty sought after. There's no shortage of work for me, and I love the work. I can choose the jobs that I want, and I choose the jobs where I feel I can contribute because I understand the story or the psychology, and can add stuff to it. So I love what I'm doing. I really do. And so that's great. I've also been doing a little coaching. So that's fine. That enables me to use some of those skills that I developed over my career. And, the one nice thing between coaching and therapy that is huge, and this somewhat goes back to the earlier discussion. In therapy, you've got all this licensing stuff. And the sort of perception is, you're the therapist, you're the professional, you should know better. Here is this poor person coming to you, and they're ill medically, and you got to fix them. Well, first of all, most people come into psychotherapy are not medically ill. We create some diagnosis for them so they can get reimbursed. But, they're just normal people with normal problems. And to assume that you have all the responsibility in the relationship is very unhelpful and be nonsense. So the one thing I like about coaching, that doesn't exist. If you come to me with a problem, I'll help you with the problem. I'll give you some solutions, but it's up to you to put them into practice. We share responsibility. My responsibility is guiding you. Yours is doing it. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. And I like that. It doesn't have some of these absurd assumptions that, therapy and medicalizing it have. And, my story is featured in the May edition of Psychology Today. And what's interesting is I have had a number of people reach out to me and ask me for help coaching-wise. And I've been doing that with a couple of people, which is great. So, I do some coaching, and I do writing, and I write my own books. And hey, this is perfect for me now. And so
Well,
I can say 9 years later, hey, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. Uh, I wish I hadn't been so stupid, but hey, sometimes realizing that you're stupid is a good thing. Right?
yeah. Well, you certainly made the best out of an unfortunate, series of events. So I think there's a lot of lessons in your story. So I again appreciate you sharing it. But well, let's wrap this thing up. Thank you so much. I'll put some show in the show notes some of the links and places folks can find you, and we'll go from there. But Howard, thank you so much for the time. This was great.
Thank you.